Hey, what up? It is I, Alistair, owner, trainer, and writer of Gnome Gnite Minis. Come to you today. Previously I've been in a little bit of a fuck, a fugue, a funk. Because I'd started filming, I'd started recording the next video, which I said I was going to do, which was sculpting a member of my Necropolis Warband. But the thing is, I've already finished it. Here's my sack of miscellaneous resin minis. This fella. Yeah, this guy right here. This little dude with his bone club is like the remaining points that I had required for that. And I didn't film any of him. So I'd just be doing an extraneous thing. I'm not unconfident that I'd make something interesting. But it was without purpose. I was just battling to get it done. So, when I am battling to get stuff done, making a silly little fellow is often the way around that. And so, I have made a silly little fellow. I have made, well, I don't have him painted up yet, so you'll have to wait to see. But I've made a little fellow. I've thought of a little story to go with the fellow. I've filmed the whole process of sculpting him. Even like pouring the mold and then demolding the first cast, which I'm then going to paint up in a little bit, and I'll film that too. And so here shall be moderately, hopefully mildly interesting footage of me assembling that. And I'll do some nonsense and even some lore. I've thought of some lore today, so there you go. You're going to get a bit of that too. We're going to kick into that now, and we're going to get into the sculpting. Okay, here we go. Just getting out my materials. Got a cork as my sculpting handle. Got a silicone nail art dot tool. A lot of my stuff comes from the nail art section. If you want hobby supplies and you don't want to be paying the ridiculous premium, get it from the nail art section. Got a paperclip here to act as my armature. Big fan of steel wire as like your base armature, because after you bend it, as long as you got that pose right the first time, it'll maintain its position and you don't have to worry too much about bending it out of position. And it appears that polymer clay sticks to it fairly well, or at least this clay does. Actually, I haven't found any much of an issue with Sculpey either, so that works out all right. What else have we got? Just checking our height here against my original armature. And even though I bend my legs this particular way, just the way that the clay ends up going on, we end up with a different leg forward than I thought we were going to. But that's life. Anyway. Alright, getting polymer clay. I don't use anything particularly fancy. Mine is Kmart polymer clay. It's not Super Sculpey, it's not Fimo, it's not Bees Putty. One can get decent detail in on, just dollar store clay as long as you beat the shit out of it and have some patience. And I don't feel precious about it. I feel a bit precious about my Super Sculpey and my epoxies. I'm like, oh, I'm going to use this. I want it to be right. Whereas I can just sort of sculpt away happily with this stuff and not feel too bad if the sculpt comes out kind of garbage. And because I am free and I'm not stressed, I am more likely to actually sculpt something out of it. So there you go. One does not require the finest materials in order to make something half decent. Here I am just putting down sort of like a little base, little pudding base to sculpt from. I find that if I try and do feet like directly on the cork, they sort of peel up and end up curved. Whereas if I put down this base and then cut away the clay around them, I end up with it stuck nicely to the cork, and then, my feet and stuff are flat. Which works out better for my eventual casts. Also, I first discovered this by doing like sort of a scenic base, like doing the whole base attached to the cork. And that's an absolute bastard to cut around, so when you're cutting the mold. So I've made some changes since then. Alright, just making out the bulk here. So this particular bulk is the ass. The most important part of this little goob, this little goblin, is the fact that he's just a helmet with his cheeks out. And so I'm using the small end of the ball tool here to just shift that clay around and get the clay to stick and adhere. Just adding just sort of a lump here in the crotch, giving him the old Ken doll. And then carving out the lines of like where the edge of the big helmet's going to be. with the other end of the ball tool. Ball again, also from the nail art section. Go to the nail art section of your local store. There'll be all sorts of good stuff there. This particular tool is just a sewing pin bent and then stuck inside a chopstick. And there you can see I've cut away sort of the middle part of the foot. And here I am laying out the actual toes in place and then carving out the shape of a foot. So I'm using subtractive modeling here, just sort of cutting out the vague shape of the foot, sort of making sure there's a lump there for the heel, putting little divots in for where the arch of your foot goes, using the silicone tool to sculpt things and then cutting out a bit more of the ankle so he doesn't have quite so cancalious ankles. I think this first foot I sort of screw up a little bit and I'm not happy with, and I'll go back to and fix later on, but whatever. Teasing up sort of sculpt clay there from the ankle up to form the calf muscle, and then here I am carving in the toes, just putting in 5 little lines and then blunting out the ends and then sort of dragging in sort of the arches of the bones in the foot and then putting in little tiny dots on the end to act as the nail beds. But that's a pretty fat foot. And then I go and I do the next one. And I'm significantly, I'm whacking the quadricep muscle on here. Just a nice big lump of clay and then melding the edges of the clay, smoothing that with the silicone tool. I find silicone tool really nice for like smooth organic shapes, musculature, just anything you want to be smooth, just running the silicone tool over it. It's just nicer on the clay, you just end up with less drag lines. Whereas your hard surfaces, you probably want, your harder tools in there. Like when you'll see me later on when I'm doing the armor, I'm mostly using my metal ball tools. Alright, here we go. Second foot, once again, subtractive modeling there, just adding a little bit more clay in for the front of the foot and the toes, cutting out the shape of the heel, and then back to the toes. And so seeing as I'm doing the same thing again, and you've seen it once before, once again, teasing up that calf muscle, I'll talk to you about my sort of lore concept for these little goblins with their helmets. Not an original idea. Completely, absolutely not an original idea. Little man with legs and a big helmet is sort of one of the miniatures, it was described to me as. Just generally one of just an idea that someone will doodle. Lots of little medieval marginalia, just little dudes in helmets. Lots of Hieronymus Bosch has the fairly famous one. Lots of sculptors have done their variation on this theme. I know Curtis of Ramshackle Games has his Onion Knight. It's one of the Boglanders, miles above this sculpt, and if you want to buy one and you're in the UK, buy his. It's really good. I think Blightbones has done one too. Maybe Vavictus. Look, any sculptor who's anybody has done a goblin inside a helmet. But I've come up with an idea. So my idea for these little fellows is that a goblin was out one day, discovered knights jousting, got spotted by some squires or something and hunted for sport. And then, as he was lay there dying, discovered by his goblin brethren, he described jousting to them, and they were all really taken by this idea. But of course, they didn't want to, get killed actually watching a joust, so they've gone and they've stolen like a book of heraldry to learn about jousting. And of course, in heraldry, it's all just helmets, and so they've gone, yes, knights crashing into each other. These must be, the knights, these big helmets. And so they make themselves giant helmets and then sprint at each other full force and just run into each other and then fall over. And whoever doesn't fall over or die or be concussed is the champion of the goblin joust of our goblin knights. Here you can see I'm making adjustments to that first leg. I just wasn't happy with it. It was a lot chunkier than the other one. So I've come along, I've smoothed everything out, I've dragged a bit of the clay off the quadricep because it was too thick, and I'm redoing the shape of pretty much the whole leg, and then doing it again. So this particular goob, I've decided to call him the Concussdor. You can draw the conclusions on that pun there. because he is sort of our champion of our knights. I've done a couple of other little goblins with legs, like goblin helmets with legs sculpts before. So I've got a frogmouth helm. We've got one that's sort of mushroomy, and then I've got this one, which is a more traditional helmet. You can see me, you'll see later on where I find the general idea for this particular helmet. And so now I've got a little set of 3 goblin knights who will joust and run at each other full force and then fall over. I know that there's an Indie Miniatures rule set, which I can't remember what the name of it is, which is for jousting. It's literally just 2 models. I'll have to look that up. If I can remember what it is, I will add it in the show notes and the descriptions. But if not, I do not. And someone can tell you in the comments. One of the 44 subscribers will no doubt tell you which one that is. And here I am, just double checking like our size, because I do want them to be moderately in scale. I'm not, wedded to the idea of perfect scale, but I do generally want it right. Alright, here we are, cracking open Pinterest and looking up some helmets, and you can see me there in the description. And I'm just looking at, interesting miniature helmets. I like that sort of big visor underneath. I'm looking at sort of just variations on bassinets, sort of very classic knight in armor helmets. And I found that one with sort of the big bevor, I think is the term, if it was to just be an individual piece on armor, like the really not quite a houndstooth bassinet, like a hound skull bassinet, because that'd be difficult to cast with a big pointy end, or at least it might be less than easy to cast. I think that because this is a nice sort of upwards shape, it'll be fairly easy. So I've just whacked a bit more, like a big chunk of clay there in the middle, and then 2 smaller chunks either side, just to create that that silhouette. And then I'm teasing it out here with my fingers. You don't need to use tools all the time. You can use the tools that you were, given. Your hands are for manipulating, and then you can just go in and then smooth out all the fingerprints and whatever else afterwards. Because I needed to pinch from both sides. And then, once again, using the small dot to blend out 2 pieces of... the small ball tool to blend out 2 pieces of clay, and then the larger ball tool there to overall smooth and add a nice hard surface to it. And so, just thinking, like, I literally just looked at that helmet for, a very small amount of time, and then I go, alright, cool, got it. I don't need to actually be working on the reference, because this is, it's supposed to be jury-rigged by some goblins based off like a heraldic drawing. It doesn't need to be an accurate helmet. Alright, getting some more clay here. Actually, no, I think my cat had jumped up on the bench at that point, so I was getting rid of him. So, 2 balls of clay to be either side to be our hinges. They're sort of equal sized. I've got my spare clay living on my thumbnail there. I learned that from a guy called Brother Vinny. Makes beautiful historical sculpts just out of polymer clay. Genuinely, if you want to be depressed about your sculpting ability, go watch his stuff. He makes awesome things. And talks very nicely about his whole process, where he gets his tools from, and all of that. So there's a recommendation. Go watch Brother Vinny. Anyway, there I am, just sort of teasing out our details, making our eye sockets here, smoothing out some of the edges, drawing like a nice delineation between face and visor. And then I crack open another nail art tool. This is called a cuticle pusher, I believe. But it's genuine. It's a metal tool. It looks like this. I use that for sort of my longer straight or curved lines rather than my needle tool. And then I'm just teasing that out with a ball tool to make it a bit bigger. Coming back through with the ball tool, just smoothing, blending, getting rid of some cracks and some whatever else. Alright, I see my eye sockets, making them bigger with another ball tool. I believe that was a embossing tool was the name of it. Alright, getting 2 balls of clay, equal-sized balls of clay, and just touching them, and then I realized that one's probably too big. So I get rid of it, and then make it a bit smaller, and then put it back in. So these 2 balls of clay are I think those are our nose bits. So we've got a central nose, And then teasing out sort of the two flares for your nostrils. And then we've got big eye sockets, which I'm going to add 2 spheres of clay into, and then just sort of touch those with the silicone tool so that they end up nicely round. And there we go, that's our boy. What am I doing here? I'm adding a crest to the center of the bassinet. And then again, blending with the ball tool there, just scraping the 2 edges together and then going over with a larger ball tool to smooth it out. And then teasing out our eye sockets and eyeballs again, making them nice and round. Yeah, I haven't done the eyeballs yet, obviously. So these eyeballs, bigger. Eyes, hard. Eyeballs are hard to do. You've got to be on the spot with them. But for this guy, because he's sort of an insane goblin who's been concussing himself several times, having his eyes be slightly different sized and, you know, at slightly different heights adds to the effect. And so this is why, again, in my opinion, if you're a beginner sculptor, making weird little freaks is the way to go, because any oddness, any variation, any whatever, it's just character. Whereas, you know, if I'm doing, you know, a 28mm historical miniature, everything's got to be real nice. Alright, there goes his crest done, and then I decide to add sort of a plume on top here. So get just teasing out those delineations, making sure that the helmet and the legs are nicely separate. Just touching up here, having a look at him before I decide to add the last little bit of clay. Out of frame! Great mise-en-scène there. Just putting in some sort of vents for the goblin to breathe in. And then adding sort of rivet holes on the side there of our hinge for the visor. My idea is that, like, his whole body's in there. So he's got a big head, but his, like, arms and everything, he's all sort of hugging himself. Like that egg on The Simpsons, or, you know, those Zorb things, which look like just a great injury risk. I'm thinking about having that, like, teased up straight to the back, but then I think better of it because I'm worried about that spot catching bubbles casting, and I really don't want to sort of have to get out my epoxy stuff. So I'm just making sure that there's no gap there for silicone to get stuck in, just sort of making sure that the 2 pieces actually touch each other, and then making the gap a bit more pronounced with the ball tool. I'll disguise, and then coming back through with the tip of that metal tool there. And I tease that up onto the back again, to avoid sort of bubbles being caught. And I scrape in sort of hair plumes here with the side of the needle tool. So the same way you would, like, you can use that technique for hair, for long flowing hair, mustaches, fur, that sort of thing. Alright, there we are. Happy with him. He has been baked. So I'm just going to remove him from the handle now and get him ready up to cast. So I've got a scalpel here, just running that underneath his feet, around the piece of wire there so he separates cleanly. And then using it here just to shave out and clean up the edges of the visor. Make it a bit sharper, make it a bit more sort of hard surface. Hard surface modeling, kind of hard with clay, especially, you know, at my current level of sculpting. I find it difficult to do nice, neat, large, like, metal plates and whatever. For sort of jury-rigged, goblin, orky sort of metal, it's fine. Chaosy metal, also fine. But for, you know, a knight in shining armor, we have a bit of trouble. So, the current sculpting method is using this, not sculpting, casting method, using this Gorilla double-sided tape. I find it gives me like a nice well to pour my resin in. Gives a little reservoir when I run it under the pressure pot. So if any bubbles sort of disappear and shrink down, there's a little bit left in the feet to go down and run into. It comes away clear when I remove the mold, when I have to remove the master from the mold, unlike my sculpted bases, which I have to cut around, which is just an absolute bastard to do. So this is the new technique for me. Alright, so I'm getting my silicon here. Once again, solid solutions, silicon. I can get it for reasonable prices in reasonable amounts. And then I've also got some chunks here of just excess silicone from previous pours to add. Because I either pour too much or too little. So if I've got too much, I put that in the pressure pot too. And then sort of use that to bulk out upcoming molds. So here we go. Moved everything closer to the edge of the table so I can pour my silicone nice and neatly. And because I'm doing him inside a measuring cup, I know roughly how much silicone I need to cover his head. However high he is inside that cup. So I saw that he's a little bit above the 20 mil line. So I was hoping that 20 mils of silicone would cover him completely, but this turns out to not be the case. And I'm pouring here sort of sideways so that I can control the flow of silicone and end up with 10 mils of one and 10 mils of the other. I'm putting it all in the one cup because I just don't want to waste materials. And I just do a decent job of stirring. My stirring technique here is not the stirring technique if you're not going to vacuum pull or pressure pot your silicone. Like I'm going round in circles and scraping, and my stirring stick is a paddle pop stick. This is introducing quite a lot of air into the mix, which is not what you want if you're not vacuum casting or pressure casting. But because I am, I can afford to get away with it. I've got the pressure pot from my girlfriend's previous dice business, so I can get away with it in this particular instance. And you can see there, I've not completely covered his head, so I crack out my previous chunks of silicone and then just cut them up and insert them around the model. Try to have them not touching the model and not hard against the side of the cup. But it takes quite a bit. There's a fair bit of cutting and inserting here. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty... it came to me in a dream, that little bit of lore of Goblin sort of discovering the idea of jousting, but not having any actual, like having a third-hand experience and a Book of Heraldry to come up with what they want to do, with what they think it is, and then trying their best to emulate it. It's sort of cargo cults, Pacific. That's interesting things. That's Pacific Islanders who, during World War II, would have they'd help American and Allied powers, sort of army and navy and marines and whatever, move through their particular Pacific islands. However, the issue was that they were uncontacted prior to that, had no real concept of what a plane was. And so after, they've been left with a wonderful airstrip that no longer gets used, they want this sort of abundance from the gods, and so they start carving, big aeroplanes into trees, making themselves new airfields, conducting military parades, building watchtowers. Super crazy idea, and that was possibly part of the inspiration for my idea of sort of goblin knights who make themselves giant helmets and then charge at each other at full speed. Yeah, there you go. Again, not an original idea. There are no original ideas. Everything that you think of is assembled through a confluence of all of your own experiences and things that you have read. And like I said, this particular miniature, I must have done 5 or 10 mil, nearly 10 mils of chunks there. That's wild. They needed a full third more silicone than I actually made. Very silly. Alright, here we go. So, you notice I got 2 scalpels there. I got one for the paper and then one for the silicone. And here you can see the feet of my miniature, and then I peel away the double-sided tape with the scalpel. And that gives me, nice access to the miniature so that I can get in and get a nice cut. Again, borrowing from Robert Talone here with my cutting method. A zigzag on the outside, split the silicone with my 2 fingers, or my thumb and my middle finger, and then just touching it to separate it, and drawing a line, like a straight line against the miniature, as straight as I can get, and then drawing a line to my zigzag cut on the outside. And then I'm borrowing from Curtis of Ramshackle Games here by only doing 1 cut. Previously, I do a cut in from both sides, but this way I get less parting lines if I can go at it from just one angle. And the ability to access the underside because of the introduced piece of mounting tape has allowed me to actually do that. So here we are, nice clean, like there's just a little bit of levering to get the guy out, and that is a really nice mold. Like you can barely see that parting line. Hey, we got some actual noise here. So we're going to get nice, satisfying demolding ASMR. I'll shut the hell up just for that noise. And there's your little boy. Very nice. Passed that one. Once again, I've changed polyurethane resins. Started with Solid Solution 660. Perfectly fine budget resin. Set up in about 30 seconds. Was way too fast to use. I switched to Barnes Medium Set, which was quite nice. Like, it feels really nice. It was 1-to-1 by weight, which was a little bit of a fuck around. And it was really viscous. So I'd catch small bubbles, which was a bit disappointing. And then I've moved on to, and I'm annoyed that I've moved on to this, I've moved on to Smoothcast 305, and I'm annoyed that I have to use the actual gold standard. Alright, so there he is. One of the other sculpts for my Goblin Knights, and then here we are painting him up. So I've just hit him with Citadel Black Primer. Like, I use Citadel paints because that's what I started with, and I haven't finished these paint pots after many, many years of the hobby, because I don't paint anything. And so, you know, like this is not an endorsement of Citadel products. I make an effort to not buy from Workshop anymore. For various reasons, they put girls in the game. No, I started feeling off about them when there was that big push against fan animations when they introduced Warhammer Plus. And then various baffling business decisions since then have just made me want to stop buying things from them. But that's okay. I am allowed to do that. I will not think any worse of you if you buy Warhammer products, but just I no longer do. I just use them as I previously have them. I'm not gonna, you know, go insane and burn my Nikes. No, I'm going to use the products that I currently have, and then I'm going to swap over to other products, hopefully from independent retailers. Anyway, I'm slap chopping. I honestly, painting is the least enjoyable part of my hobby, and so here I'm just using a makeup brush to dab on, like, just sort of as a gentle dry brush, except it's not a brush, it's a makeup sponge. It's a dry sponge to draw up my sort of 3 levels of shadow, grey, lighter grey, and then a white. And then I'll come back through with contrast paint. Like, this contrast paint I bought when contrast came out. That is nigh on 10 years ago. It might even be more than 10 years ago. And I still haven't finished the pot, so that shows you how much painting I get done. I've used a fair amount of the red, but just not of many of the other colours, so there you go. I was really excited too. Like, I painted up this wonderful Blight King with contrast paints after seeing the Blanche use of them, and I was like, oh, these are really cool, and then just never did. So there we go. Just whack the green on the Goblin flesh. Then I'm going to grab another brush. I'm going to do the red here for the plume first. Sorry. So this is I think it's a size 3 brush. It has a decent point. This is sort of my nice brush that I use for nice things. And then I have my shit brush, which I use for shit things. Like, if I'm going to dry brush, if I'm going to paint like a big area, this is the one. It once was a nice brush. It is no longer. It's all flared out at the ends. So I use it to dry brush. I use it to paint large areas. Anywhere where I'm not being nice to the brush, I use this one. So I'm just dry brushing on metal here to act sort of as My plan was that I wouldn't have to shade it so much, but sort of the dry brush ends up becoming an overbrush, and it ends up being a little bit shit, so I have to come back through with some wash, but that's fine. I am doing my best here to like twist myself at an angle because I'm just running off the light from the window here, and I'm trying to avoid having the model in shade so you can actually see what I'm doing. But there we are, just dry brushing on, just gunmetal silver, sort of that sort of black and silver mix. All over the metal, doing my best to not hit anything else. I think I do pretty well. I think I just accidentally dry brush one of the eyes, which is fine because I come back through and I have to paint those white anyway. And then I've just grabbed the nice brush and I'm just teasing it along the edges here of the... just where the metal meets other colors, just to make sure that I haven't cross-pollinated with my paint. And then I do a decent job of washing up my brush. Same pot! Like, I know you're supposed to not mix your metallics in with your non-metallics. However, have you considered that I'm doing a fairly quick paint job here? Like, this took 20 minutes, I believe, if this footage was to be at 1 times speed rather than 4 times speed. And then here I am going with a just Mornfang Brown. I believe that's sort of a burnt umber over the base. This is just my basing scheme for all of my miniatures, is just Mornfang Brown and then a dry brush of Rakarth Fresh over the top of that. But here we are, so just highlighting. So Slap Chop, I find it looks okay, but if you wanted to step it up and actually have it look, you know, decent, I find decent. Just look nice. Look like a paint job that took more effort than a Slap Chop effort. A Slap Chop paint job does. My suggestion is to come back through and just do highlights. So if you Slap Chop sort of your base and then come back through and just put some nice highlights on parts of your miniature, it really steps it up and makes it look like a lot decent return on time investment there. Maximum output, minimum effort. I find that little bit of extra there brings it up quite nicely. And then we're just doing Mephiston Red over the top of the plume here. So these are some pretty, like, what's the word? Pretty classic orky colors. Red, green, and metal. Think your Warcraft orcs. Think your classic Games Workshop orc with a K and also a C. And your Oryx. But yeah, red and green and silver. Nice, quite a nice mix. And then I'm just doing a little tiny white sort of higher, just touching the eyeballs with white, just to have them sort of exist. And you can see that they're sort of at different levels. They are the same size, but they're, you know, they're a bit skew-if, and so they make the guy look pretty concussed. And then I'm just running over with the wash here, just Agrax Earthshade over all the metal bits. Which make it look a little bit rusty, a little bit grimy, and sort of more goblin-y than the silver. It's possible I could have done like Null Noil and then highlighted like Stormhurst Silver or something over the highlight areas and had it look a bit more sort of classical Knight in Shining Armor, but I could not be bothered. And there we are, just dry brushing on the Rakarth Flesh to make the base look a bit dustier. And I can't really touch the model at the moment because he's got wet wash all over him, so I'm being very careful and just touching him on the table there. And then I believe, last little bit, just gonna stick a tuft on to disguise the little bit of extra on the, little bit of extra resin underneath the feet. So just got some just standard super glue. And then I take him outside and give him a clear coat, and he's all done. So, there we go, all finished. Just give him a coat of clear coat there. Our moderately concussed little goblin living in his little helmet. I've actually started, like, just a regular one of these fellas, but, you know, Will it focus is the question. Will it focus? No. No, it will not. It will not focus. Anyway, just like a big-headed goblin with a small body and stumpy legs to like give some context to the same sort of size. Like it's not going to work completely, but it'll work a little bit. So if I want to, you know, finish him off, I will. That's about it for this one. Just a fun little guy. It's nice to make
fun little guys. You can sort of break your inertia and get something done. And now I've got some ideas for what I'm going to do with that other big sculpt that I was supposed to work on. And that can take as long as it takes, and I'll feel a bit less shit about it. I've got some other stuff that I've sort of poked and prodded away at, which I'm going to tell you about in its own little sort of sub-generalized hobby bullshit video. And we'll go from there. As always, like, subscribe, do the YouTube bullshit. Tell me what you think's going on. Play Necropolis 28 or an independent miniatures game. That's about it. Alright. Ladies and gentlemen, bye.